All right. Hi, everyone. I'll start by calling this meeting to order, and let's take a moment of silence reflection. Thank you. Katie, it's all up to you now.
All right, let me share my screen. So welcome, everyone. This is our final meeting of the Resiliency and Sustainability Advisory Committee for 2020. We will set up a schedule for 2021 and announce those shortly. My name is Katie McCain. I'm the Director of Sustainability for the City of Charleston, and I'm really excited to see so many people on the call with us today. We are also live streaming on YouTube, and you can go back to YouTube and check and revisit anything you'd like to see. So Stuart already did our quick welcome. Here's our agenda for the day. So first, Mark is going to talk to us about the Peninsula Flood Risk Management Study. He has an update for us. Then I'll talk a little bit about our new mattress recycling program. Then we have a special guest, Matt Hutchins from NEMAC and Fernleaf, who will talk about our vulnerability assessment final report. And then Stuart and I will talk about our climate action plan update and some progress we've made and what our next steps are. And then we will have a public comment period. And if you're on the webinar, you can just raise your hand if you have something to say. That is great. If you're on YouTube, you won't be able to raise your hand on YouTube. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mark for his update.
Thank you, Katie, and good morning, everyone. I want to ask Katie if I could do is present just a quick update on where the management study exists as we are speaking right now. The Army Corps of Engineers, on their side, I'll speak to this just very quickly. They have taken, they've worked through optimization since the release of the tentative selective plan, and they have gone back and taken the results of optimization and running it through a series of models to come back out with another presentation on what those models tell us. The things that they're focusing on that will be new coming out with the new set of models is going to be, they're looking at the interior hydrology and how the impact of the wall would be on interior hydrology and how they might mitigate for that. And they're also looking at any potential negative effects to other parts of the city or the area from the wall being there. And I know there's some concern from citizens that, you know, if the surge comes in, if it pushes away, does it go, where does it go? So those are the two big things that they're modeling right now. Like I said, they did a lot of good work, I think, in optimization, and then we'll all have a chance. The real news on the Army Corps of Engineer project, though, is that the Wagner and Ball team that the city, along with a series of folks in the city, helped to bring on board. They're now here. When I say here, they've been working remotely, and they've been up and running for about 2 weeks, maybe a little more than that, and seem to be doing a lot of activity. They are meeting with key stakeholders, primarily around the perimeter of the city, getting input. I've been in 2 separate meetings with them already in different groups that I work with, and then they'll actually be in the city next week for some face-to-face meetings with key people as well. And then what we hope will happen with them, so the next milestone that the project itself has is the agency decision milestone. So we were, that meeting was scheduled for October 14th. The city asked for and was granted approval for an additional 60 days. So we could have the input, 60 days worth of input from the Wagner and Ball team as we reviewed our options at agency decision milestone. What does that mean? Well, the Army Corps is looking for 2 things from the non-federal sponsor, which is the city, And there's two questions we have to answer at the agency decision milestone. One is, do we support the tentative selected plan as written in the study, recognizing that we need to support the plan, or we need to have what's known as a locally preferred plan. So at this point, I think it's important for this group and actually everybody to understand this is just the study that we're looking to support. Okay, it's the study. However, without a signed study, it doesn't move forward for any further work at all. So if the study doesn't get signed at the end of this study period, everything just stops. If it does get signed, then we move on to what's known as preliminary engineering and design. And that's the phase really where we begin to look at the specifics of where the wall might go and what the wall might actually look like based on the results of this study. If we were to decide that we were looking for a locally preferred plan, there's a couple of thresholds there. The thresholds are, one, the city would have to pay above and beyond any cost to the Army Corps' tentative selected plan. Okay, so if the locally preferred plan, if we were to have one, and I need to really stress, we're not out looking for a locally preferred plan. We are making sure we don't miss one. Okay, and that's what we're doing, and that's what we're asking Wagner and Aboul to do as well. And then if there's a locally preferred plan, it cannot reduce the amount of protection it provides, and it can't reduce the amount of benefits it provides. Okay, the city's on the hook for any additional cost as well. So all of that will be a really busy next 45 days is, I guess, the best thing I can tell you from the city perspective. Looking forward to having the Wagner and Aboul team here next week. Looking forward to, I know I'm going to go up and see the chamber next week, right, Scott, and try to get some of this out. And for the council members on the phone call, we'll be sending out a note probably this afternoon or tonight with the Wagner and Aboul schedule, where you all be invited to come over and see what's happening there as well. So that's where we are with that study. We're working through it. I'm very pleased with where we are, and very pleased with the line of questioning and discussion that's been going on. So any questions on that at all before I turn it back over to Katie? Okay, it's you, Katie.
Okay. Everyone's quiet this morning. Let's put it back on our PowerPoint here. Well, thank you so much, Mark. Appreciate the update, especially from the mountains. So next on the agenda, I was going to chat a little bit about some more details to our new mattress recycling pilot program. Last time we talked a little bit about how we received a grant from South Carolina DHEC to support this pilot project. And some of our challenges, the main one being we can no longer take mattresses to the Bees Ferry landfill. So that means we must actually drive farther and spend more staff time getting rid of these mattresses. We need to go to Ladson to the Republic landfill. So we're spending some more money doing that. And the thought was, can we reimagine how we're spending that money and potentially look at a recycling program? So with the help of DHEC, we have this funding to do a pilot project, and really we're going to test ways. How do we collect it? How do we store them? How do we transport them? And ultimately they're going to a special mattress recycling facility in Pamplico, South Carolina, which is about 2 hours away. So there are certain transportation details that of course need to be worked out and tested. It's about a 9-month project. So we're looking at, and we just received the grant in an August-September timeframe. And just as a quick review, when we recycle mattresses, we are not turning them into new mattresses. We are actually disassembling them and reusing the raw materials in different ways. So here's our new logo. Our program will start on January 1st. We're really excited. And we are working on the marketing materials now to get that out and the advertising. So we're pretty excited about this. Here's some of we're going to test a few different collection methods, such as a drop-off site, Online pickup. There's actually a company right now called BedShred that has an online pickup service. So if you wanted to recycle your mattress right now, you could schedule it through them. There's a fee for that, of course, but we're partnering with them and trying to work together and collaborate, see how we can leverage those resources in that existing program. We're talking about piloting some pop-up events, perhaps college move out. If anyone on the committee has other ideas, we would certainly entertain them. And of course, looking into how we can improve curbside pickup and potentially collecting them curbside, or what it could mean if we don't collect them curbside, how that could save us some money. So I talked a little bit about this. Can we better purpose those funds that we're spending to now drive these mattresses farther away? If we can get these mattresses out of our trucks, they're actually pickup trucks, that could result in less trips to the landfill, less overall gas, less staff time. So maybe we could save money that way. And that would allow us to put some money towards the hauling of these to get them to the recycling facility, which is 2 hours away. And like I mentioned, that private program already exists. So trying to figure out how we can make this a sustainable program so it isn't just another line item on the budget. How can we save some money to spend some money in a better way? We are, of course, targeting residents because that's who we pick these mattresses up from now. There are definitely retail businesses that dispose of a lot of mattresses a month, and businesses will still be responsible for discarding their own waste. However, we think there could be a great opportunity to partner with some of these businesses, and we welcome anyone interested in pursuing that to reach out to us, and we're happy to entertain that discussion and see if we can recycle even more mattresses. Right now, we are picking up about 40 mattresses a month, give or take the month. So obviously during move out, it is higher, whereas the retail stores have a couple hundred they're handling a month. So it's pretty different numbers.
Katie, is that total for the retail stores or is that per retail store?
Per retail store. So
Yeah,
think
that's
of
a lot.
most people, when you're buying a new mattress, you have the store they'll dispose of yours. Sometimes they charge a fee, but most of the time they're still taking them to the landfill. They're not recycling them because it is more expensive to take them 2 hours away than 30 minutes away.
Right.
So I'm really excited to announce our partnership with bedshred.com. They will be our hauler. And here's our new logo. And of course, our other partners, DHEC and Charleston Mattress is an affiliate of BedShred. So this is pretty exciting. We will have more details on our website, which is our homepage /mattress-recycling. So we'll send out more info when we have it, but are looking forward to this starting on January 1st. Are there any questions, suggestions, ideas? All right.
Katie, Stuart,
Yes.
have you already started to distribute information to the mattress dealerships?
We have not. We just got our logo created and we are working on the flyer. So we're working on the details of the collection right now.
Sounds great.
Do you have connections in the business?
No.
Okay.
I did at one point, but not anymore.
Okay. So when we have this, we'll share it with everyone. And if y'all can share it within your networks, that would be great. And we'll help spread the word. And like I said, this is a pilot program. So we'll see what works, what doesn't, and then look at possibly continuing that within a future budget cycle, because the grant will only fund the pilot part of it.
So, Katie, great work on this. I was just thinking, you were talking about contacting the mattress companies and all like that. Maybe could we consider taking this to the Sierra Club and letting them be aware of it, number one, but asking them if they could provide some volunteers to make those calls and to do those kinds of things? It seems like a worthwhile project for some nonprofit. If not the Sierra Club, then some other environmental group might be willing to give us some assistance on this.
Yes, that's a great idea. We could put it out to as a volunteer effort. And if anyone's interested in helping, that would be great. So thank you. If anyone on the call is interested in helping, you can say that at the public comment period later. Feel free.
Sorry I'm late, folks. I was got a budget meeting today and was requiring a little attention. Thank you.
No problem.
So Katie, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay. Hey, hey, Mayor Tecklenburg. I'm the
Yeah.
chair of the local Sierra Club, so maybe we can talk with Katie about that.
Oh, great.
And-
Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah. And question about the mattresses. So for larger businesses, if they're going in a construction landfill, is that also not something that can continue?
For mattresses?
Right. So if they got into a construction dumpster and went into a construction landfill, is that not okay? Or
I'm not sure the answer to your question. I'm not sure what you're asking. I know that
because
they
there's
can be thrown
different
away.
landfills. Yeah, there are different landfills. There's municipal solid waste landfill, and then there's a C&D landfill. So are they just banned from a municipal solid waste, or are they banned from both?
Well, it
landfills?
depends where you are. It depends what landfill it is. So the Ladson landfill is a private landfill owned by Republic. So they accept mattresses there. The Bees Ferry landfill is Charleston County, and they no longer accept mattresses. They used to accept them.
Okay.
And
Okay.
across the state, every landfill is different.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Great.
Well, now we will move on to Matt. And Mark, would you like to, let me make Matt co-host so he can share his slides. Okay.
Okay, well, thanks everybody again. And I just wanted to do a quick introduction of Matt. You've met Matt before here. Matt was the project manager from Fernleaf, who worked on our vulnerability assessment. And just as a key date, that vulnerability assessment will be posted, if not today, before the end of the week. It's been a while in the works, but I want to say this from my perspective, I don't know of any other study that we have used as much in city work as this one already to date. This has been used in every project that is looking at any kind of data on our vulnerability and risks, and want to thank Matt and his team. It's important to note, as Matt's going to go through just the highlights of the report, that this is really a city planning tool, and that's why we do these things. It informs not only about the hazards, but it really also focuses in on who is at risk and what is at risk, what types of facilities and where they're located. It also talks a little bit about the jobs that are at risk, the economy that's at risk, and all this was taken from publicly available databases, and I think Matt might cover that a little bit, but somebody asked me the other day, you know, how is the data captured on this? And it's all publicly available databases that's aggregated together to put this report together. As I said, it's really been used. We're using it in the comprehensive plan. The Army Corps of Engineers project used it. The AECOM project used it. It's being used in just about everything the city's doing since we started. And that was the idea, that we would all be working together to make sure that we're using the same data. It should help us used if the city, as the city integrates it in, it should help us to know where to work first and how we reduce our greatest risks. And those will be further decisions. And like I said, it'll be posted sometime this week. And with that, I want to thank Matt and his team and turn it over to Matt to go ahead and give us a quick final report.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Mark. Yeah, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you today. As Mark mentioned, we wanted to give just a real high-level overview of the assessment and the process that the consultant team facilitated from about March of 2019 to March of 2020. We want to talk about the process a little bit, but really focus on a few key findings, really, again, high level, just a few key findings from the assessment and how those are being used to inform action and strategies for building resilience. And then at the end, we want to mention a quick update on the status of the final report. Before going forward, I also want to recognize the team that I feel really fortunate to have been a part of. It included NEMAC Fernleaf, Collective Water Resources, Kimley Horn, and Joyce Communications. And as a team, we were really able to bring a range of perspectives and expertise to the project. That was really excited. It was really exciting to see how that came together. So moving on into, first, what is the assessment? And so as Mark mentioned, the assessment really is a resource for city leaders and staff to use to assess and manage impacts from hazard events. As Mark mentioned, the assessment was designed to be integrated with the city's flooding and sea level rise strategy, the Dutch dialogues process that happened last year, and other planning efforts, and be integrated on an ongoing basis. Another key point is that the assessment uses trusted sources information and best practice, and especially using NOAA. And so, as we'll see here in a few examples, NOAA is really is looked to as the trusted source for looking at future change related to sea level rise. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but also the Steps to Resilience framework, which was the framework and the Steps to Resilience that the assessment worked with city staff over the course of the year. And third point here is that the assessment does look at key issues and challenges, but also is solutions oriented. And it's really designed to inform targeted use of limited resources, which we all understand today are more limited or as limited as ever before, and to do this in a complex and changing world. So a big part of the assessment early on was defining this idea of community assets and core systems. And this really became the foundation for the assessment. And we worked with city staff on defining these systems, including property and public services, businesses and homes that are included in that category, critical facilities, including schools and public safety. And the next one was roads mobility, really focused on access to critical services. The third is economy that Mark mentioned, looking at sales volume, jobs, and employees. And then people and socioeconomics, that is really, their foundation that this assessment really focuses on, looking at sensitive populations and other critical services that support people and services. The assessment then focused on what hazards to assess. What hazards are most likely to harm people and the community that results in loss or failure of these assets or core systems in the city. And so the assessment focused on 8 hazards in total, 4 of which were flooding related, and 6 of which were climate related. So the others you see here, in addition to flooding and sea level rise, are earthquakes, extreme heat, water shortage, and hazardous materials. And so the assessment really focused on defining vulnerability, and it does that through a variety of ways. And here's one image that conveys how vulnerability can be viewed from a physical standpoint. These two images, or these two buildings in this image, are equally exposed, say, to the threat of flooding, but the characteristics of these two properties make one more vulnerable than the other. On this example, looking at the elevation of the building on the left, that would be less vulnerable to an impact of flooding than the building on the right. But it's really characteristics like these that are assessed differently for every hazard in the assessment. And this is just looking at one aspect of the physical aspect of vulnerability. The other really key part here that the assessment focused on are social vulnerabilities as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. The assessment is citywide and focused on the city limits and then beyond the city limits. And this map on the right shows the extent of the study area, which the extent is made up of census tract boundaries that encompass the city. And the areas here in the colors on the map show the different areas that were also focused on throughout the assessment. And so 9 areas in total, including Daniel Island, the downtown peninsula area, James and Johns Island, Cainhoy area in West Ashley. And moving on into some of the key findings, one high-level finding is that the highest levels of vulnerability citywide are to flooding, storm surge, and earthquake hazards. And so these stats you see here on this slide show just a few of those asset categories that we talked about, looking at businesses, homes, and critical facilities and their levels of vulnerability to these three hazard types. You can see here with businesses, over 80% of businesses are vulnerable to storm surge, a little over 70% to floodplain inundation. For looking at homes, well over 80%, close to 90% vulnerable to storm surge. And for critical facilities, nearly 90%, 88% vulnerable to earthquake. And so this is just a snapshot of a few of these asset categories with high levels of vulnerability. Another key finding from the assessment is that certain areas of the city contain especially high proportions of the vulnerability and risk throughout the city. And so the images here are showing the proportions of vulnerability throughout those areas of the city and how they're vulnerable, or levels of vulnerability to floodplain inundation. And so you can see there on the left, looking at homes, that West Ashley Inner has the highest proportion of vulnerability throughout the city. About 30% of the citywide vulnerability to homes is in West Ashley Inner area. And then looking at jobs, of all of the jobs vulnerable to floodplain inundation, 65% are on the peninsula. A third key finding is that increased frequency and severity of tidal flooding will be a primary impact to sea level rise. And so different levels of sea level rise with different timescales were evaluated throughout the assessment. What this is showing is just the assessment related to roads and mobility. And so this is showing the levels of vulnerability at the water level of 3 feet above mean high or high water. And so this could be a threshold reached between 20 and 30 to 2100, looking at the impact related to tidal flooding again, with more persistent inundation as time goes on throughout that projection. But here with this level of flooding, the image on the right in the red areas, the red road segments you see on that map are potentially inaccessible roads at this water level. And so you can see here the numbers there associated on those on that map, 10% of major roads inaccessible at that level, 25% of minor roads throughout the city. And the really key part is, okay, what are the potential inaccessibilities and inaccessibility to emergency response and emergency services? And so it shows about 15,000 properties citywide at that level that could be inaccessible in times of flooding. And the last key finding we'll touch on here, and it's a really important one, is that areas that are vulnerable to hazards are also socially vulnerable. And that's a really key finding throughout the assessment that you'll see. And here's one example of storm surge. The assessment highlights that about 96% of homes in the most socially vulnerable neighborhoods of the city are highly vulnerable to storm surge. This also includes public housing. Nearly all public housing properties are vulnerable to storm surge, and about 96% of food SNAP or food stamp retailers are vulnerable as well. The image on the right shows just the homes, and the dark red areas showing the highest levels of vulnerabilities to homes, to storm surge. And when we talk about social vulnerability, the assessment used information from the CDC to define different types of social vulnerabilities. And the CDC frames them through 4 different themes, such as housing and transportation, minority status and language, and socioeconomic. And so the assessment, again, pulled in that information from the CDC to look at these elements of social vulnerability as well. So we talked about the assessment focusing on these hazards, but the assessment also, as you mentioned, is solutions oriented and looks at options and opportunities. And to do this, the assessment aligned with the city's critical components that are part of the city's flooding and sea level rise strategy. And this really want to give credit to the city. These are the components that the city came up with. This is not something that the consulting team developed. But these critical components really provides this holistic approach that's really needed for building resilience. And this is an approach that we really commend the city on, and one that we know that other communities are going to be really interested in using and building on as well. So the assessment, in looking at options and priorities, identified over 90 different strategies. The assessment report does highlight the top 20 or so recommendations of these 90, but there are lots of strategies developed throughout each of these components. You can see there are 28 strategies related to infrastructure, 10 strategies related to land use. As one example of a strategy, here's one that is one of the top recommendations based on the assessment findings. And this is a strategy related to resources, related to acquiring appropriate flood response assets for public safety. So the assessment highlighted that about 86% of properties citywide could be inaccessible to emergency response in major flood events. And so again, this is a different image from the tidal flooding one in Sea Level Rise earlier. This is showing from a 100-year flood event, and the red roads there on the map showing, again, roads potentially inaccessible by emergency responders. And so you can see here that the assessment helps to inform, the relevance to the strategy, but also inform how and where to prioritize resources related to inaccessibility and emergency response. So that was just one example strategy, but the assessment is really designed to inform pathways to a resilient future. And so we recognize that limited resources means that every issue cannot be addressed, but there are 3 types of risks that the assessment underscores that all require planning for today, and in some cases, additional stakeholders in order to address. And we classify these into 3 types of risks. The first is related to near term. It includes the current flooding hazard and tidal flooding with current sea level rise and hazardous materials. The second is risk related to long-term future change, looking at sea level rise, obviously, and future tidal flooding, but also extreme heat. And the third is risk related to high impact events, especially storm surge and the potential of an earthquake event. And so, the other thing that the assessment underscores that I think is important to mention is that these challenges that the city faces are unique and unprecedented. As a mid-size coastal community experiencing growth with the level of current impacts in the near term and the potential for increasing risk, the city of Charleston really stands out as especially vulnerable to these types of events. And that is not new information for you all, things you all already know. But it is unique of a southeastern city of its size. However, there are opportunities, and the assessment highlights a lot of these opportunities. And so it's important to recognize the importance of being solutions oriented. And the assessment does highlight how some of these strategies can mitigate potential future risk. And so with that, also wanted to highlight the final report. And so all this information, we just touched on a few high-level findings. There is a large report that puts all this together and includes assessment summaries that really focuses on key findings. And so you'll see that the main body of the report focuses on key findings, tries to not have too much technical information in the main body, but really focus on what key issues are. And also includes a section on options and priorities that we just mentioned. There is a resource that is in the appendix that includes a lot more detailed information that goes into technical documentation, that includes general area reports for each of these areas highlighted in the study area map. There's an area report for each of those 9 areas, and includes these 2-page asset hazard profiles. And so for any of those asset categories, for any of the hazards, you can look at a 2-page profile for the vulnerability and risk information, and includes all of those 90 options that we highlighted. And so with that, I'll let Mark or Katie, if you want to mention the report release. I guess you already mentioned that, Mark, of happening this week.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and post it online. And Katie, where are you going to post it? Where's it going to be located?
It will be on the resilience portal. There's already a page about the vulnerability assessment, so I'll post that right after this meeting.
Great.
So any questions for Matt or myself or anything at all about the vulnerability assessment that will be out this week?
I saw one question from Scott Barheit in the chat. What is the definition of extreme heat? How are we defining that?
Great question. So the assessment looks at vulnerability to extreme heat event as any day that would be over 95 degrees is what the National Climate Assessment information supports. And so there's information that you can see some of it in the report, but the National Climate Assessment gives a lot more detail of how they define days over 95 degrees and the potential for those increasing with time. The assessment in this report and the approach that we use for this assessment is to look at vulnerability based on levels of development and impervious surface and tree canopy coverage. And so really looking at it from an urban heat island approach with social vulnerability as a key indicator of vulnerability to extreme heat. And so the assessment you'll see in the report is looking at relative vulnerability to extreme heat based on those different indicators.
Gotcha. Any other questions for Matt?
Hey, Matt, and this might be for Matt and for Mark. This is Mark Messersmith. Just wondering how that assessment matched up with some of the existing City of Charleston drainage improvement projects that have been ongoing, like in the Church Creek watershed and Market Street, Wagner Terrace, other areas like that.
Mark, I can chime in and see if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, go ahead.
And so those drainage projects were considered in the step of options and priorities. And so there was a process of overlaying where those drainage projects and initiatives are happening across the city to help guide some of the development of the options and priorities. And so you'll see in the report and in the appendix where you see all the options, there's a lot of detail there of different initiatives that tie into some of those projects, but also identify areas of opportunity where there may not be projects necessarily identified. And the assessment report information should help to identify those opportunities going forward. But Mark, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Well, I think what I would add is a good question, Mark. Thanks for asking it. I think, this data here, which underpinned a lot of the work that the Dutch Dialogues report did, which validated the need for the work out in West Ashley, out in Church Creek, which was also validated by other studies. So all of the studies have lined up. And if you look at what we're actually now doing out there, it's a variety of things by taking things out of the floodplain, which is what we're doing, restoring the floodplain. Once we take homes out of there and turn the property back, but also looking at some hard infrastructure solutions that are just beginning to get underway. So I think it lines up perfectly with that. But again, this is, those projects will come on as funding allows and as it's prioritized by City Council and others. Also the AECOM study, which Matt Fountain's been leading, when that is ready to come out, that's going to look at projects by storm surge, or not storm surge, by the basins that you look at, and that will also help to put a little finer point on some of those projects. But the short answer is yes. The long answer is it's getting longer, but I think it's all aligned. So good question.
Thanks, guys.
And Matt, I also see a question on here from Danny Cassis about does the report address impact to utilities from the conditions studied?
Utility facility locations are included as part of critical facilities. Right. And so that's one of the key parts of the critical facilities are the utility locations, but looking at it from a facility standpoint only.
And also a nice comment from Kendra Stewart, thanks for looking at social vulnerability. It's important how we think about addressing these issues. And thank you, Kendra, for that comment. But the team, all of the team, city staff, certainly, and then the Fernleaf team, we started with social vulnerability as one of the key things that we had to make sure was looked at every stage of this report. And I think when you get into the report, you'll see that.
So Matt, if I may, you mentioned that, go back to that slide, if you don't mind, about the vulnerable populations and some extremely high figure, 97% vulnerability on storm surge, right? About 96% of homes in the most socially vulnerable neighborhoods are vulnerable to storm surge. And if I'm not mistaken, a goodly number of those are on the peninsula. And then the jobs vulnerability was on another slide, 60-something% on the 65% on the peninsula. That's risk of floodplain inundation. Did you measure that out on storm surge as well?
Yes, so that figure is also available for storm surge, and there's one summary page in the report if you're wanting to look at some of these stats related to each hazard. Page 25 of this final report that will be available highlights for every single asset category, including the jobs, and for every hazard, what the level and percentage of vulnerability is. And so that's kind of a one quick page that I kind of refer folks to in the report that'll be available where you can find that information.
So where I'm going with this is, and you mentioned, you kind of overlaid the projects, the drainage projects, I guess specifically to the vulnerability to the floodplain inundation, but perhaps the storm surge as well. Did you include, and I know I was late, I missed Mark's report on the Corps of Engineers Peninsula flood risk, or the 3x3 program as we call it. I mean, if King for a Day and that project got done, the impact of that on the vulnerability to both our vulnerable housing stock and to the job vulnerability on the peninsula, that would be a kind of a fascinating comparison or study. Did y'all consider that?
That's a great question. I'm not familiar with the specific findings from any of the Army Corps studies yet. I think that was one of the key points of integration that I think the assessment, and we talked about with city staff through the process, that'll be a key integration point of, what are the, from a benefit standpoint, but from really a vulnerability reduction standpoint, what are the assets, people that are currently in harm's way that a project such as that could provide some mitigating benefit or protection to. So we didn't look at that in this report, but it's definitely something that the assessment information in the format of their information should be in a format to make that connection.
Right. Just based on what I'm seeing here on your vulnerability assessment, it would seem to me that we get a big bang for our buck by doing the surge protection, but it's just a general observation.
So,
right.
Mayor, interesting you bring that up. On the call I was on before this with DHS, FEMA, and the folks over at Delft in the Netherlands for the project that we're kicking off tomorrow. One of the science folks over in Delft actually is going to show exactly what you just mentioned.
Oh, good.
And that was without any problem from us. He's going to take Hurricane Hugo and show it coming to the peninsula and what kind of impact the storm surge system would have in protecting assets on the peninsula. So I'll get a first peek at that tomorrow. Didn't know it was happening. First peek tomorrow.
That's great. Awesome. So Matt, thank you again for this critical assessment and study. And it comes at us a great time, as I know this will inform our comprehensive plan that's being updated right now by our community and our planning department, and the way this does integrate with our sea level rise strategies. I think it's very timely, and thank you for your work on it. As we read the whole thing, I bet we might have some more questions for you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I also want to say, thank you to the city staff, and we feel really fortunate that we had the opportunity to work with you all on this project. So thank you.
Were there any?
I want to ask real quick before we move on. We have a lot of medical facilities on the peninsula, and I just wanted to see if Matt could tell us some key takeaways from the study about our healthcare facilities.
Sure. Yeah, the healthcare facilities are, again, one of the components of critical facilities. And so when you look in the assessment, you'll want to focus on that asset category of how it's being framed and the key findings related to critical facilities. The medical district area is a known area of vulnerability to current tidal flooding. And so it's one of the areas that is unique in terms of near-term and also long-term risk. But that's where in the report, you'll be able to find some of the detail related to medical facilities.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments, observations? Well, terrific. Thank you again, Matt. We appreciate that. And I urge everyone to access the full report when Katie gets it up. And Katie, can you send everybody a link to it maybe that's on this committee?
Yes, I will forward it out to everyone on the committee.
That'd be great. Terrific. Please take a better look at it and let us know if you have any further suggestions or comments or questions. So next we'll move right along to our climate action plan update. Along with everything else, Katie's been hard at work on that, and Stuart. So Katie.
Great, thank you, Mayor. So as everyone knows, we are in the middle of updating our climate action plan. That's our strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we are.
Y'all please.
Sorry. So we finished milestone 1 over the summer, inventorying our greenhouse gas emissions, and we are in the process of establishing our targets and developing the plan right now. So I wanted to share some feedback that we received from the community. So as part of our public participation process, we had an original survey that was out on our website, and we also had a public meeting. And I'd like to share the results from the survey, and then Stuart will share the results from the public meeting. That way everyone on the committee can hear the comments that people said, so we can keep those in mind as we start to shape the plan. And these comments will also be shared with the task force and the subcommittees. So we had over 222 responses as of last night, and that was about over 6 weeks. The majority of folks are residents, but you can see that there are some folks outside of city limits, that maybe in Mount Pleasant or North Charleston, that also took the survey, which is great. And we had a couple non-residents. I do want to start with the demographic diversity because I think this is really important. I have received a couple comments saying, why is this important? And it's important so we know who we're hearing from, and we can go back and say, we didn't reach the target audience that we wanted to reach, and maybe we need to rethink things. So if we're, for example, only reaching all males, then that's going to skew our survey results. So the demographics are really important, although these were optional to respond. We had a good diversity in the age category, good diversity in the income, education. You can see there's a decent diversity there too. We had some folks who are Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish that commented, and that was great to see. Now, while the majority of folks were white who participated in this survey, I'd just like to point out that this is actually one of the smallest or largest percentages of non-white people we've had in some of the surveys. So while we're not there yet and we're not getting the participation we would love to see from other demographics, this is better, and we are on the right track, and this is better than in the past. So that is neat to see some more diversity in the surveys. So for those of you, most of you took this survey yourselves, And the first two sections were some questions on how do you personally feel about something versus how do you think people in Charleston feel about it. So we'll go through some of these questions. So the first one was, I'm concerned about climate change, and you can see the number of people who strongly agreed on the left. And then on the right, and notice that the y-axis is different. We can thank free survey software for that, but just keep that in mind. But on the right, you can see that the number of people who strongly agreed with this comment for how other people think about it is very different. So you'll notice this pattern as we go through these, that the personal feelings seem to be a little more stronger than how we think other people feel. So I'm concerned that climate change will harm me and my family. We're seeing the same pattern here. And there'll be a full report released on this, so we don't need to go into too much detail. I'm concerned that climate change will harm future generations. Wow, this is a big one, huh? Climate change is caused mostly by human activities versus people in Charleston think that it's caused mostly by human activities. So there's a pretty big difference there. We need to act now. People in Charleston think we need to act now. So that's a really big difference also. My individual actions contribute to the global impact of climate change. Starting to level out. I think people in Charleston should be doing more to help prevent climate change. Interesting. I want to do more to help prevent climate change. So this is a neat one to see, people willing to want to do more. I am already taking action to prevent climate change. Also pretty strong on the left side. And here's all those questions just on top of each other. So you can see, so the top is the personal feelings and the bottom is what people think. And you can just see that stark difference between that giant blue bar versus the other colors at the bottom. I thought that was pretty interesting. So that was the first section. Then we asked, to what extent do you agree with the following statements? Efforts to prevent climate change present an economic opportunity. So we had a lot of folks agree or strongly agree with that. Investing in energy efficiency provides job opportunities in Charleston. Again, a lot of agreement with that statement. Energy efficient homes reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we went on to say that greenhouse gases, of course, trap heat in the atmosphere, which leads to rising global temperatures. And that's what causes our climate to change. Lots of agreement on that. My transportation choices impact greenhouse gas emissions. Again, a lot of agreement. There are definitely some folks that disagree with these statements though, so keep that in mind. Home electricity use and heating and cooling contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. We have a lot of agreement there. Workplace electricity use and heating and cooling contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. Even more agreement there. Solid waste contributes to the emissions. Lots of agreement there. And then we asked, what actions are you already taking? And we had a lot of write-ins that were great to see, but the largest ticket items were conserving electricity, limit buying items that produce waste, limiting meat consumption was pretty large. About 60% of the group is already doing that. So that was great to see. Performing energy efficiency upgrades, also a big one. And then walking instead of driving, or riding bike instead of driving, or riding transit instead of driving made the list. We've about 17% of people already drive a hybrid or electric vehicle. Only about 7% of people have solar powered electricity. And then, like I said, there were some people that said that they're not doing anything. There were about 8% of the respondents. So that's something that we need to work on. And of course, there were a lot of extras. So I'll send out a complete report with all those extras there. Do you think the city of Charleston should be doing more than they are currently to address climate change? That was the majority, yes. In the past year, have you become more or less supportive of taking action? We have a lot of people saying they're more supportive or neutral. And then, like I said, we had a few open-ended questions with lots of responses. So I'll send these to you in the final report. It was really good to see these. These were optional, and we had a lot of folks that were interested in providing feedback. So we will share that with the group, and I will turn it over to, well, first, are there any questions on the public survey? There will be a second public survey and a second public meeting after we start drafting the action items in the winter. Okay, Stuart.
Okay, Katie, are you going to put up the Word document?
Yes.
One of the things that's very interesting is what Katie just reported by the survey actually was part of all the responses at our community meeting last week. Probably some of the important items, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but we asked everyone, do you support strengthening our target emissions goal and adding a short-term goal? And the overwhelming majority said we must be 50% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. There was almost 100% consensus on that. Katie, can you just scroll down? Well, we then asked, what can the city do? And I think we got across the point that whatever we do in a climate action plan for the city of Charleston must be a real plan, and that we must be able to make sure that we, in the future budgets, that we also provide for that. You can see employees carpooling. They actually addressed each of those issues. Building, there's talking about getting greater usage. We know that the city already does energy audits, but how can we take those energy audits even further? Transportation, can we phase in electric vehicles, starting with the administrators, et cetera, and police? Mass transportation, we know we have the new bus, high-speed bus coming in a couple of years, but what are the other things that we can do? Encouraging carpooling, more green space, more park and ride, and see if the city can model a lot like composting, etc. We then asked the same question to the businesses regarding businesses. And again, it was green, we used to do the Green Business Challenge. Maybe we should reenact that, encourage participation. Can we do renewable energy as a must for all new buildings? I know that sometimes we don't have the authority here in Charleston, but are some of these things that we should be lobbying for? Should we ever give out a building permit in the future that does not include renewable energy in their building process? Asking all the businesses to do an energy audit. There's actually a program that 37 states have adopted called PACE, which actually provides a lending vehicle for businesses that want to do things. How about making sure that you have a bike rack? Could you reimburse employees for biking or walking, or pay for employees to take the bus? Weatherization, that goes back into the energy audits, composting. Can every business have an EV charging station? Could they renovate their roofs to be green roofs? Could all of their parking lots be permeable parking lots? And this came across that anybody who does have a parking lot, and since everybody wants to park in the shade, can we put roofs on parking lots that are solar roofs? We then asked, what could residents do? And we said, can we find incentives? I know that Dominion has a small incentive. Can we increase that for replacing less energy efficient air conditioners and appliances? Add some incentives for adding solar panels. Compost came across in almost every area, use of EVs and hybrids. The park and ride came up again, setting back your hot water heater, your thermostats, provide education. That we really, many people don't know what we're doing, and they also don't know, as the mayor has said in the past, that climate change is an existential threat to the city of Charleston. So these are some of the things that we could do. Could you grow your own food? But also by providing the education would really be great. And then we came down to what are some potential barriers. More incentives from the city for residents to install solar energy improvements, etc. Possibly encourage Dominion to expand their programs And again, we need a common American understanding of the concerns of climate change throughout not only the nation, but the state, and maybe take our plan in the city and be able to use that as a model for the state. Education again, and sometimes we have to take a look at how that education is beneficial, not for a political fight, but for individuals. And people think it's not economically feasible, but we see that the use of renewable energy has saved people and cities and other municipalities a lot of funds. So again, Katie's going to post this. It was really exciting to participate, and some of you that are on this call also participated. And it's a good feeling knowing that people want to be involved and get involved. So that was our community meeting.
Great, thank you, Stuart. Anyone have any questions? Okay, so now really quickly, our Climate Action Planning Task Force met in September, and I'd just like to update you on that discussion. So we had about 25 folks, and we of course went over, some logistics, green plan history, what our climate action planning process is, how important social equity is. We went over our 2018 greenhouse gas inventory. We talked about the climate science, and then we had a discussion on short and long-term target emissions goals. So for the short-term discussion, and I should say that we're going to continue this discussion. So no decisions have been made yet, of course. But the discussion was that yes, we definitely need to create a short-term goal. We need to make sure it's realistic and that we can achieve it. The group really wanted to stay within the 10-year time frame rather than 2035, aiming for 2030. And really felt that this short-term goal is more important than the long-term goal. And some of the ranges Stuart had mentioned, about 50% by 2030. We also talked in a range from 30% to 70%. So you can see on the right, there's some other goals just to give you some ideas. So our green plan from 2010 was 30% by 2030. It was more of a midterm goal because that was 20 years away. And two places that have recently updated their climate action plans are Boynton Beach and the Memphis area. And these are actually new numbers for 2020, and they did 50% by 2035 and 51% for 2035. I'll also just share that Columbia, they have an older action plan, but they're at 28% by 2025. So that just gives us an idea. So our next step with this discussion is, now that we have sort of a foot to stand on, we will start quantifying the proposed action items and putting a cost to them, and then revisit these emissions goals based on data from that quantification. So we'll use metrics to inform those goals, and we'll revisit them. And again, once those goals are in a final draft form, they'll be presented to this committee. And here's the long-term goal discussion, aiming for net zero by 2050. We really don't know what it's going to be like in 2050, what technology will be like. So typically a climate action plan isn't a strategy towards a long-term goal, it's more towards the short-term goal. And of course, the importance of keeping equity and fiscal responsibility and science at the center of creating these goals in our planning process. And you can see on the right some of the long-term goals that some communities have adopted. And our current goal is 80% by 2050. So we're talking about potentially updating that to 100% or net zero by 2050. So that was the discussion. And what happens next is we're gonna convene the subcommittee groups. So we have over 200 people who have volunteered to be on these subcommittees. I am looking forward to seeing how this works virtually, but we're going to give it a try. We're going to take deeper dives into these subject areas and create some proposed strategies. So here's again, the public input opportunities. So if anyone's still interested in volunteering, you can let me know. There will also be another public meeting and another survey probably coming out in January, February timeframe once we have some draft items for folks to review. And you're of course welcome to reach out to me if you have any other feedback. And my last slide here, I know we're running a little over, is just an estimated timeline. So I'm hoping at our first meeting in 2021, we'll be able to go over the draft action item list. You will be receiving some emails with that content too, so you'll have a chance to review it ahead of time. And what we'll do is flag the action items that we would like to discuss potentially as a group, and we can talk about that at our next meeting. And then I'm hoping we could have a final draft plan to you potentially by our second meeting in 2021. That way we can start working on implementing it after. So that's tentative timeline. And that's all I have on the climate action plan. Are there any questions before we jump to our public comment period?
Committee members? Well, Katie and Stuart, y'all have done a fine job, and that's terrific. You've got 200 volunteers signing up on those subgroups, and it looked like you have some pretty detailed recommendations already. So as y'all refine those, it'll become a very robust and meaningful plan, I think.
We're excited.
That is exciting. So anybody from the public want to make comments to us? The floor is open, however Katie manages that.
So I didn't see that anyone signed up to speak or provide comments. So if anyone would like to provide comments live that is on the call, you can just raise your hand or send me a message and I will unmute you.
Anybody out there want to share a comment with us?
I don't see any action. Okay, well, that's
Okay.
fine. If anyone would like to follow up with me, feel free to do so.
Great. All right. Any other business or comments from the committee? I thank you all for your service. I guess that's talking about the schedule. So this is our last meeting for this year. We'll get back together in January. Is that right, Katie? You were saying? Yeah. Any further business? Hearing none, we stand adjourned. Thank you all for your service.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone.